Renewable energy and California commercial real estate. That's the subject of today's The Commercial Real Estate Report, empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development with Abernathy Holdings. We build Class A self-storage sites in California and Arizona. Very excited to introduce you to our guest today because it was just recently I was introduced to her because we're trying to figure out this solar situation in California, which we'll talk about in today's podcast. But she's got a great resume. She's the co-founder and CEO of what's called Green Econome. She founded it back in 2009, so way ahead of the renewable sort of thing that's going on right now today in our world. Also, she was a CFO and VP at New Millennium Home. She's got her California contractor's license, MBA from Pepperdine. So a very long and beautiful resume. Marika Erdely. Marika, it's great to have you with us, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start with, I think, maybe what's happening just within the solar situation and some of these green energy laws right now that are taking place in California. And we were just talking about this offline, how our team was trying to go through Title 24 with the solar situation. And we're like, man, are we inept? Are we reading Chinese here? What, like, you're like, no, Chris, that's just kind of how it's written. So I'm curious, some of the mandates right now that are taking place in California, and what do you see the impact being on commercial real estate?
Well, I think Title 24 is written in a very engineering mode. So it is hard for, I think, non-engineers to read it. We struggle with it as well. So don't feel bad about that. I think these mandates of what's coming down in California are really, I mean, a lot of it's driven towards reduction in GHG emissions from buildings into the atmosphere, because that's really a bad thing. And 40% of the GHG emissions that are out there causing havoc in the planet come from commercial real estate. So I think, focusing on these mandates is important for the next generations. But also, I think it increases the value of the property. And I think that's something that people really need to focus on, is that energy costs will continue to rise. Why? Because the state has mandated that 60% of the energy that's being generated by the utilities has to come from renewable sources, which means you have, if you drive out to Mammoth, you can see all that LADWP's built all that solar. And there's wind farms and all of that. So who's paying for that? Well, the ratepayers are going to pay for that. So your cost of energy will continue to rise.
Mm-hmm.
And so and energy costs are something that they're not fixed, right? You can actually do something about them. And if you're going to reduce them, then your NOI is going to go up. So then your building's going to be worth more money. So it's kind of a no-brainer, really, when you look at it from a standpoint of, oh, do I want to increase the value of my real estate? Let's focus on energy. It's going to pay off right away.
So let's talk about how you are then helping people increase the value of their property, because I'm presuming with some of these regs, initially you had a lot of pushback from the commercial real estate owners going, oh my gosh, more stuff I got to deal with, more stuff I've got to figure out. So what was the initial response, and then what are you doing to help them sort of overcome that and show them the increase in value on their property?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe, I think if you focus just on the City of LA's EBW ordinance, Existing Buildings Energy Efficiency Ordinance. It's an ordinance that's been around from 2018. A lot of people still aren't complying, but basically what it's focused on is all buildings over 20,000 square feet have to report on their energy and water use. That's phase one. Every year you got to report. Phase two is every 5 years you have to show that your building is more efficient, or you're going to have to pay to have an audit, an ASHRAE level 2 audit done for either energy and or water. So to avoid that, let's say you want to avoid spending money on a report that maybe you don't really want to, spend $10,000, $15,000 on, that's going to sit in your shelf. You're not going to read it, or you don't care about it. Move that money into a lighting retrofit, which would be the number one thing, right? LEDs, the reduction in wattage is like 66% easy on every single lamp. So like, why wouldn't you do that? So trying to convince people of that. Many people appreciate it. There are incentives. If your building is a certain size, you can get incentives from LADWP. But generally, it's one other piece of this, is that mixed incentive, because if there's a building owner that owns the property, but then there's a tenant in there who's paying the meter, the electric meter, The owner doesn't necessarily want to pay for that lighting retrofit because the tenant is the one receiving the benefit. So there's this mixed incentive. So I think that's one of the problems I have in convincing people to do that lighting retrofit, is that the lease doesn't have a very clear focus on who's going to pay for that and who's going to benefit that. And the same with solar, right? The owner's going to put the solar on, it's their investment, but now the tenant's going to be getting the benefit. However, the state of California has changed their laws, and the owner can put that solar on their building, and then they can sell the energy to the tenant. So now all of a sudden they have a new source of revenue. So now it's even more money that the building is making, not just on the build, or the owner is making, not just on the renting the building, but now they're making money on the solar, the energy that they're making by selling it to the tenant. Or the newest thing that's coming in 2024 is community solar. So now you're going to be able to sell it back to the grid. So there's different options of it. I mean, I try and convince people that the lighting retrofit, I mean, the NOI on the property is going to go up. It's worth making that investment.
Let's back up to the solar for a moment. And I think this is where there's so much, and I'm curious, maybe it's just me, but so much confusion from the standpoint that some of the consulting conversations that we've had with people is they said, hey, California, at one point, it was very easy to sell back to the grid. They've changed the laws. Now it's much more challenging to sell back. And now you just said, hey, Chris, coming in 2024, there's going to be community solar to make it, I'm assuming, simple and easy again. So one, what's the truth? And then how do you begin to sell it back to the community, and what kind of rate of return are we looking at?
Well, I think you have to really pay attention to where your building is. If it's in an investor-owned utility, so Edison, PG&E, SDG&E, then there's certain things you can do, like the community solar, I believe, is more for them. LADWP doesn't have that, although they've had a feed-in tariff program, which is similar to that, where you would put the roof, the solar on your roof and sell it back to LADWP. That program has been around, I don't know, 5 or 7 years. It's been around for a long time. So it's kind of, one, you first have to identify what utility your building is in, and what does that utility allow, right? So the community solar is new. It's not even defined yet. So that's something that is, I believe, in the investor-owned utilities. So I think that's supposed to be defined in the next couple months. So that's one piece. The other piece where we're talking about, I was talking about selling it back, again, that's only in the investor-owned utilities. So that's where you can make money. And there are software packages out there right now where you can collect that energy that the building owner or the tenant is using and then sell it back to the tenant. So first identify your utility, and then identify, do you want to sell it to your tenant? Do you want to sell it back to the grid? What do you want to do with that generation?
But the money that I'm going to get back for selling it back to the grid has decreased quite a bit.
It is. But there is a new program, and it's an old program, actually. I just heard out from one of my partners. Oh, yeah. So what happened, what you were talking about, is NEM 2.0 versus NEM 3.0. NEM 2.0 was you could sell back with NEM, net energy metering is what it means. You could sell back to the grid and you'd make less than what you were paying, but you would make more money. NEM 3.0 means you're basically not making any money if you're over generating, right? So you want to go ahead.
Why would they change that? Because it seemed like there was such a great incentive to get people to move to solar, and then they changed the financing on it, and you're like, why?
Because they didn't want to pay people back. I think that was a cost that they were having to do. And what was happening is they were over generating. So there's so much over generation. My understanding, and I'm not an expert in this area, but what I've heard is that there's so much solar being generated right now in California that we're selling it to other states. But at the end of the day, when the sun isn't shining, we have to go to the grid, and the grid right now is drawing on natural gas. So now that's super bad, right? That's a lot of carbon and everything with natural gas that we're drawing on. If you drew from a battery, you wouldn't be drawing from that. But I think that cost of natural gas is higher. They're already selling the there's already overproduction of solar in California that they're having to sell it to other states. So I think it just wasn't cost effective for them, and they changed it. I mean, it took a while for it to switch from NEM 2.0 to 3 because there was a lot of opposition. It was even worse, I think, than it was. They were even going to charge you, I think, like $85 if you had a meter and you had solar, which is like, for residential, it's like, why even have solar then if I'm being charged $85? But there is still supposedly for multifamily, you could still be under NEM 2.0. Someone just told me about that. But it is specifically for multifamily, and it looks like just in investor-owned utilities. So keeping up on all of these is kind of tricky, right? There's a lot.
It is incredible to hear you share even what you just mentioned. Hey, Chris, it wasn't financially viable for them because there was so much solar being produced, which that's news to me. And then you're going to the natural gas, which is typically fairly inexpensive. So I guess my big question is there something missing in the whole machination around solar that needs to be implemented, or why is it not as effective as they thought it was going to be?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think if you looked at it just from this standpoint, which I don't know, is if they're over generating, then that means that the systems that were built larger than the consumption of that building, or already they're feeding into back to the grid. So that's how they designed it to make that money under like NEM 2.0. So I always believe, and this is super important, is if you're going to put a solar system on your building, first make it energy efficient, right? Solar people won't necessarily tell you that, but like get all the lighting, LED, get those thermostats, programmable wireless thermostats working so you can make sure on holidays or whatever they're closing off at the right time, those set points are tight, and that your HVAC equipment isn't just using a lot of energy, right? So make the building as energy efficient, then build the solar on top of that. But a lot of people don't do that. They just go, oh, I need a solar quote. And it's like, oh my God, you still have metal halides, your thermostats are pneumatic, so I think maybe that's the problem. I don't really know why it's over generating. It seems like it just maybe they built too big,
Yeah,
the building.
the over generation piece, I guess I can kind of understand. Obviously, there's a lot of sun here. I'm just wondering if it's maybe a grid issue, but why you were saying, hey, the finances just were not working, and what they missed in that context. So let's talk about, you mentioned in 2024, there's going to be this community solar. And again, as we continue to bring the conversation back to the owners of commercial real estate, people that are in this industry, because it sounds like this is really new. So who's going to develop this community solar program?
I think it's the PUC is developing it, Public Utility Commission for California, maybe along with the California Energy Commission, the CEC. So they're the ones that are still working on it.
And what can you tell us about it? One, and just because of your extensive experience in this domain, I mean, if you were queen for a day, what kind of incentives would you want to see in this program to make it as effective and efficient as possible?
Well, I think the benefit here is that more people can say that they're getting energy from renewable sources, right? So what's happening in the whole, if we can just add another layer on here, is ESG, right? Environmental social governance, which is a huge strategy right now that public companies are focused on and large companies. Why? Because Europe, the EU, is very focused on it. And they're focused on it because they all work together actually and are concerned about the planet. It affects them greatly, climate change, and also their sources of fuel generation with wars and things like that. So they're focused on it. The investors over in the EU are concerned about the people or the businesses that they're investing in, and do those businesses have ESG strategies. The E in ESG is environmental, social governance. The environmental is the building. So if you're a business that is leasing buildings, let's say you do triple net leases, you don't own real estate, you're not a REIT, but you're leasing buildings for your business operations. If if you're able to say that the energy that we're consuming is coming from renewable sources, that solves that box, right? That's something you can check off. And so I believe that buildings that are one super efficient and have solar are going to be more of a candidate for a company that's concerned about their ESG than someone not. Okay. And there's 3 layers of emissions that we're reporting on. And the number 3 is the one that's the hardest, but is going to affect everybody. So one is the gas. Scope 1 is your gas combustion, your cars that use it, your gas and your boilers. 2 is the electricity you're buying from the grid. But 3 is all the goods and services and everything that a public company is buying from all these different sources. And where are those sources? Where are those companies located in buildings doing what? And what are the emissions coming out of those buildings? So that's going to become, if everything moves forward, that's going to be super important. And people that have to report on their ESG are really going to be looking at buildings that are either net zero or, practically have great Energy Star scores, use very little energy, use renewables. And so the community solar is going to allow that. I think it's going to be an option for people to select and say, I want to be part of this community solar that's happening. So I can say, I'm checking that box that my buildings are using energy from renewable sources, and that makes them look good. So I think right now, taking advantage of the solar credits, and you and I have spoken about this, that there's a community additional 10% federal tax credit that came about with the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that was brought about by President Biden. And let's not forget that that is a really good thing, and that creates jobs and good infrastructure. Everyone's all critical, but it's actually a really good thing. And right now there's an additional 10% federal tax credit, and a project we were just looking at, it's like 80 grand tax credit, right off your tax liability. Adds up. So looking at that map is super important if anyone's interested in doing solar, that should be something that pulls that trigger right now, because that map is a temporary indicator of who gets that additional 10%.
Yeah, I know there's been some really interesting things from a renewable standpoint in the Inflation Reduction Act we can talk more about in a moment. I guess, so the community solar, I'm not clear on what is that going to be exactly. I heard the ESG piece, but how does that impact owners of commercial real estate?
So I think if you could sell, so you're going to build a system on your roof, and you should own it. You should own your system. Don't lease it, because if you ever want to sell the building, it's going to be hard to sell because you've got a leased piece of equipment on your roof. You're going to build this solar, and your tenant's not going to necessarily get any of it, or maybe you overbuild, and your tenant is also covered, so their consumption is covered, but you're now going to put it into this vast bandwidth of community solar. And I think you're going to be able to check it off on your utility bill of, I want to be part of that, right? So it's going to be an option that you can have.
And will it act somewhat as like a carbon credit down the line, do you think? Or
I don't think it's a carbon credit. I think it's just that you're going to be able to say that your energy is coming from renewable sources, and that's going to be something important for your ESG.
You've been in the space again since 2009. You just brought up ESG several times. There was a ton of inflow of capital into the ESG investment space for, I think, through 2022. And then I just saw, as I was doing some research for our interview, CNN put out a piece recently in 2023. You're starting to see a pretty big outflow from those ESG investments. What's your assessment on that? What do you think?
I think it's political. I think people don't want to do what they don't want to do. They don't want to spend the money. I think it's like anything. A lot of people don't believe in taking care of other people or women's rights or, the planet. And I think personally, if every company actually focused on their ESG, that building and what's going on in their building, and the social side of how do you take care of my employees, and governance, that you have solid, high moral character, diverse board. If you actually did all those, every company would be an amazing specimen of how to operate in a new world that it's not all greed, right? We're not all about lining a bunch of Wall Street pockets. And it's like, really, let's take care of our people and let's take care of the planet and let's just be better citizens all the way around. And I think a lot of people don't view the world like that. They're all about greed and they want to take care of, they just want to suck every nickel out of any opportunity and not look at it that way. I mean, I think it's really sad. And I think it's one of the reasons we have such a decline. And I mean, look at the world. I mean, just drive around. I'm sure you have it and where you live. Just get up early and look at all the people walking around with their blankets around and just think, well, gee, we're doing a shitty job taking care of our people.
I mean, that could be a whole nother podcast, right? When you look
whole nother one.
You look at the homeless situation in the state, and if you want to comment on that, but what I really want to get to with you is, as you're dealing with clients, like what are the biggest problems or challenges that your clients are facing that they're coming to you for, and then how are you helping them solve them? Like, what are the top one or two?
Well, I think one, benchmarking accurately so they know how their building is performing. I mean, it's just very simple. The very beginning of what we do, benchmarking, right? It's three things. How old is the building? How big is the building? Information about the building and its use. There's 80 different uses in the Energy Star software. Identifying that use, distribution, restaurant, hotel, whatever it is, and then filling out that building survey so the questions about it are actually accurate, and then getting the utility data, accurate data. Now, if you actually had all three of those and you had a really good and accurate score of how the building is performing, then you could make decisions for people and help them say, oh my gosh, look at your gas, because it also trends. So you can go, whoa, your gas is really high. What's going on? Oh yeah, we need to change out the boiler. Change out the boiler. There's incentives, like spend the money. So it's one, just getting that data right so you can use that to decipher what's going on, right? It's analytics like anything else. And then taking advantage of the opportunities with the IRA, the Section 179D, which is the new federal tax credit or updated tax credit, and taking advantage of those opportunities to save money in operating your building, but also taking the tax deductions. And there's also utility incentives, right? So it's like looking at all the money. And some people don't believe me when I tell them. I'm like, yes, this is all free money for you. And they're just like, are you kidding me? Can't, so it's convincing them that in fact the money is there and then moving forward. And some people will spend the money and move forward, and some people just still are tight and don't want to spend the money. So, and that goes back to that mixed incentive with the tenant versus the landlord.
Where do you see, like, take us out 5, 8 years from now? Where do you see things from an energy standpoint, and really in California? Because we all know the grid issues taking place. You just talked about some of the challenges now with solar being over. I mean, so this world much better than I do. But take us out into the future and what's happening when it comes to energy in California.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest efforts is on, this concept of decarbonization or electrification, which is a whole other topic. And what does that mean? It means decarbonization would be reducing the carbon coming out of your building. That means making it super efficient, everything, tightening it up, reducing the waste, right? But the other part is getting rid of the gas consuming equipment and appliances in the property. As I recall, LA or in California, after 2030, you're not going to be able to buy a gas stove, right? For your house or new homes, if you're building in the city of LA in 2023, getting it entitled, you don't even put in a gas line, right? It's not even, you don't have to, there's no gas, right? So the problem with all of this is, and this is where I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to meet with the city and talk about this, because it's really focused right now on the city of LA, is, okay, when you get rid of that gas, then you're going to have to upgrade the electrical panel.
Thank you.
Who's paying for that? There's no incentives for that. Unless you're doing solar and you're required now to upgrade the electrical panel, which would be another reason to do solar and kind of wrap that cost into your solar cost, right? And then deduct it or federal tax credit it. But how are all these buildings going to remove the gas out of their buildings and even convert to, we were working on a big project, 14 acres, 16 different hot water systems, and they wanted to decarbonize and change them to gas to hot water heat pumps. It's a huge project. How are you going to get there? It takes, skilled engineers, takes electricians that understand how to change those upgrade those electrical panels. How do you change that all in all the apartments? I mean, this is coming, and I don't think we're ready for it at all. I
I was
don't
just going to
think
share with
anyone
you.
knows how to even do it. There's no money for it. So,
And my biggest concern is, there's brownouts now if it's windy in California. My question for you is, you just said, hey, Chris, no gas stoves, which means it's going to be electrical. They want to get rid of gas powered cars, which means it's going to be electrical. You're going to have EV. Like the grid just won't be able to handle it. What's the plan? What are we going to do?
I think it's really important is I live in a fire zone. So I put solar on my house like 3 or 4 years ago, but I just have batteries now too. So, and I have an electric car. So everything's going to come off that battery. I mean, it's going to be a problem. I mean, I haven't converted my furnace or my gas stove or my barbecue to electric yet, but it's certainly coming. And I think it's going to be hard for people. And I think that's where the resilience, that's really what resilience means, right? So your building can still operate even though you don't have any power. And how are you going to do that?
Yeah, it's
So,
really, whoever can figure this out, kudos to you. Because then you think about obviously the insurance challenges right now that California is facing as well for homeowners. So there's such a matrix of issues, and it seems like they've got good intentions, but no real concrete solutions to some of the problems they're going to face. Is that fair?
yes, and I think also mixed in with that is the generational transfer of wealth from all the baby boomers or older that are now transferring their wealth to either the grandchildren or where it's going. But we have a lot of privately held, I had no idea how many privately held families, hold real estate in California, especially in LA, which obviously they do. But there's a lot of grandchildren that we're speaking to that are their grandparents bought the real estate in the 50s and the 60s and held on to it. And now, so you've got, and luckily they're younger, but they also are a little gun shy of, okay, I'm going to have to upgrade all my buildings. I mean, they're all built in the 50s and 60s, and who's going to pay for that? So I think it's a big question. Yeah. And add that to it. I mean, at least those people, I think most of those are a little bit more savvy. They're younger and they care about the environment, but still there's a cost associated with it.
I was just going to say that is such a valid point where you've got this wealth transfer, and I'm sure that they want to do it, but they see the finances and go, wait a second, I don't know how this is going to make sense, meaning CENTS and the state of California, they're not going to have the resources to pay. So it'd be interesting to see how this whole thing shakes out. We'd love to have you back and maybe continue this conversation as we have more pieces of the puzzle in play. So Marika, thank you. And I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I think, let us know, Marika, Green Economy. There's a lot of free money. So if you own commercial real estate and you're interested, reach out to me, Marika E at greeneconomyme.com. I'll help you find some free money.
Yeah, so you'll sit down with them and then do the consult and go, okay, here's some opportunities for you to maybe take advantage of this tax credit or this incentive kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah. And there's a lot of it. It's not like it's hard to get. Some of it's free, especially developers. You and I spoke about that program too for developers building at a higher efficiency. You can get money from the state. Or the investor-owned utility. So it's good. There's plenty of money out there. If you want to spend it now, it's not going to be there all the time.
And who's your ideal client? I mean, is it a minimum of 10 units or more, or some kind of office, or?
I think minimum 20,000 square feet. And yeah, we're working on an office right now, 200,000 square feet. That's still fluorescent, pneumatic. Love to get that all retrofit, cut their costs. Love that. That's our perfect.
You probably, speaking of bandwidth, you probably don't have bandwidth to handle all the business because of everything, all the changes that are happening. So again, check out Marika at greeneconomy.com, greeneconomy.com, way ahead of the curve here. She's been doing this now since 2009. So definitely reach out to her. And thank you for joining us here on the Commercial Real Estate Report.